listener production. Hi, Sacha Barbour Gatt with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Are you one of the millions of Aussies who has recently been caught up in union action, whether it be on the streets or on the trains? Has it made you question the role of the trade union movement in Australia or wonder what there is left to achieve? Pro-unionists are hoping you don't and are arguing they still have a place in the community.
Workplaces that are unionised are safer workplaces. There are lower rates of incidence of injuries and there are less catastrophic injuries. Workplaces that are unionised are workplaces where people are earning better pay on average.
But are unions holding everyday Aussies hostage? That conversation is coming up in the second half of this episode. First, time for the headlines with Chris Spiru. It is Tuesday, the 21st of January.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Morning, Sash. Morning, everybody. And as we just heard, Donald Trump has this morning officially become the 47th president of the United States. Following his swearing in, he shook Joe Biden's hand first, with the now former president and his vice, Kamala Harris, sitting in the front row. Trump's running mate and now vice president, J.D. Vance, has also been sworn in. Trump appeared solemn at the event, which has been held indoors for the first time since 1985 due to the bitter cold in Washington, D.C. at the moment. It's currently minus 4 degrees Celsius, Sash.
Yeah, I don't blame them for moving it inside. Look, he went on to make his inauguration speech moments after he was sworn in, and the president promised to put America first.
I return to the presidency confident and optimistic that we are at the start of a thrilling new era of national success. A tide of change is sweeping the country. Sunlight is pouring over the entire world. And America has the chance to seize this opportunity like never before.
He also couldn't resist taking a swipe at the outgoing administration.
As we gather today, our government confronts a crisis of trust. For many years, a radical and corrupt establishment has extracted power and wealth from our citizens while the pillars of our society lay broken and seemingly in complete disrepair. From this moment on, America's decline is over.
Strong words, and it will be a busy day for Trump, who has promised to sign 100 executive orders on his return to the White House.
Yeah, some speculate that he will actually struggle to fulfill that promise. Biden currently holds the record with 17 orders signed on his first day as president, but we know what's at the top of Trump's list.
First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border.
Yeah, that nationalist sentiment was pretty strong throughout the entirety of his speech, and he did speak at length about what he intends to do during his presidency.
That's right. He also flagged winding back Biden's environmental policies, tackling inflation, bringing in tariffs for imports, pardoning January 6 rioters, cancelling electric vehicle policies, and attempting to save TikTok. Now, Trump also talked about ending wars, saying he wants to be known this presidency as, quote, a peacemaker and unifier. Oh, he also talked about wanting to go to Mars. That earned a standing ovation.
We will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
Yeah, that was met with a very loud applause, as you said, Sash. I mean, the most interesting thing for me was watching Elon Musk, that was like a child on Christmas. He was so stoked hearing
excited.
that. And he was standing next to Barron Trump. Barron's face, expressionless.
Did not move.
He didn't care. He
didn't like his suitcase.
He didn't like the suitcase. Look, Trump did finish his 30-minute speech with this.
We will stand bravely. We will live proudly. We will dream boldly, and nothing will stand in our way because we are Americans. The future is ours, and our golden age has just begun. Thank you. God bless America. Thank you all. Thank you.
After signing his executive orders at the White House, the returning president will attend count them, 3 balls with the village people and Nelly among those to perform. And that will bring to a close the first day in office for Donald Trump on his second presidency, Sash.
Yeah, we can't talk about the inauguration without mentioning Joe Biden's final moments in office, of course, with Donald Trump coming in. That means it is the end of Joe Biden's presidency. He chose to issue a number of last-minute presidential pardons aimed at protecting certain people from revenge moves by Trump. So Dr. Anthony Fauci, who served as the country's chief medical advisor during much of the COVID pandemic, is one of them who earned a pardon, along with 5 members of Biden's own family and members of the House committee that investigated the January 6 attack on the Capitol. Now, Trump has warned he has this so-called enemies list, which is filled with those he feels have crossed him politically. And this final move by Biden and what will go down as his last move in the White House is viewed as a way to try to protect some of those people. So that's it. We are into our second Trump presidency. Any takeaways, Chris, from the morning?
I mean, I was wanting to be surprised, I'll be honest, when we were listening to the inauguration speech. I was hoping for something a little bit spicier. The spiciest we got was Mars.
That was pretty spicy.
That was spicy, but I mean, the border stuff, we know that was going to happen. All this rhetoric around building up this nation to be in its golden era, we've heard it. We heard it on the campaign trail. We're hearing it, again today. For me, I'm like, I hate to say it, but I'm a bit underwhelmed.
Well, I think that the point of an inauguration speech is to set the tone for your presidency. And so his MO, what he has wanted to do, has been clear from the beginning. And I think that's where his campaign was very successful. He's very clear in what he wants to achieve. Whether he has the means to achieve it is another question. And, people have voted for that. He won the popular vote. He won the Electoral College votes. He has the numbers there. And he is obviously feeling pretty confident. But as you mentioned as well, he was quite solemn at the event, which I found interesting, perhaps because this is a very serious occasion. It's not a campaign rally where he gets to do his little dance to the village people with his little waving fists.
Yeah.
Like, this is an official, formal event. We saw Biden and Kamala Harris there. The former presidents, Clinton, Bush, and Obama were there. It's not the time for him to kind of be gloating. However, it was interesting watching especially Biden and Kamala Harris's faces while he was talking about how awful the previous administration was. I did feel that was probably a little bit below the belt. But what do we expect from this man? And once again, we are entering a Trump president era. I'm sure we're going to have plenty more to talk about over the coming 4 years. We are only just starting.
Back home now, where new polling is showing Australians are feeling more optimistic in 2025 when it comes to their personal finances, the economy, the country, and Anthony Albanese. The latest Guardian Essential poll shows the Prime Minister's net approval rating has climbed from -11 to 0, with 45% of those surveyed disapproving of the job he's doing. Now, that is 5% less than those in the pre-Christmas survey, so it's a pretty good turnaround for him. Albo's approval was strongest among young voters, with 54% of those aged 18 to 34 giving him the nod, compared to 36% of those over 55.
As for opposition leader Peter Dutton, his ratings fell 4 points. He's now at -1, while 43% disapprove of him. Look, overall, there are a growing number of Australians in these figures who believe the country is on the right track. And while that's now at 38%, so it's not a majority, it is an uptick of 7 percentage points compared to December. Interesting, Chris, given, we just talked about Trump. Of course, we have a federal election this year and the political leaders have put out their slogans. So they'll probably be looking at these numbers going, okay, well, how are we feeling now about saying Labor's building Australia's future? That's very forward-facing, very positive, compared to the coalition's Get Australia Back on Track, which might not sway with voters who are feeling a bit more optimistic. So again, while we look at the Trump presidency and go, oh, we're just beginning, we are just beginning this election campaign. Plenty more to come.
And finishing this morning with the latest from the Australian Open, where Alex de Minaur has booked a spot in the quarterfinals for the very first time.
I'm glad I finally made it to the quarterfinals here. But yeah, let's go for bigger and better things. Come on.
That audio thanks to Nine. The Demon downing American Alex Mickelson in straight sets to advance. Next, he'll be taking on world number one and defending champ Jannik Sinner, heading into the clash well and truly as the underdog.
Yeah, go the Demon. And look, in quarterfinal action today, we've got Novak Djokovic, who's taking on world number 3 Carlos Alcaraz. We don't know if he's going to give his post-match on-court interview to Nine. Obviously, there's been a big fallout over the feud with Tony Jones. So we do know, though, that Djokovic has acknowledged Tony Jones's and Channel 9's apology for that whole debacle. And Tennis Australia says he is now moving on and focusing on his next match. And of course, if you're listening to this going, what are you guys talking about? We did a deep dive on it yesterday afternoon. Go back and have a listen.
Yeah, and we actually put a poll in our broadcast channel Behind the Briefing on Instagram. Just search The Briefing Podcast and you can find the broadcast channel there. We asked you guys how you feel about Novak refusing to give on-court interviews. And interestingly, 66% of you voted in favour of him. You said good on him, you know, he did the right thing here. There was a whole heap of reasons you guys gave and they're really, really fascinating reads. So highly recommend hopping into our broadcast channel and having a little look at all those replies. There was heaps of nuance, which I was pleasantly surprised to read.
Yes, thank you, briefers, for engaging. We love it. Look, also worth checking out today in the AO action is America's Coco Gauff and defending champ Arina Sabalenka. They're both in quarterfinal clashes. And Aussie tennis legends Leighton Hewitt and Pat Rafter are taking part in a Legends exhibition doubles match.
It'll be great to watch. Great to watch.
Chris, thank you. Next up, it is our deep dive looking into the union movement in Australia and whether it's fair to say they're holding Aussies hostage. Did you enjoy a lunch break at work today? Have you recently taken some annual leave to rest and recharge? Or maybe you got a pay rise last year off the back of your award rate going up? Did you know that all of those benefits that you enjoy at work every day are thanks to trade unions? The movement, which first started here in the 1800s, has been instrumental in working within and alongside politics to secure almost all of the rights we have today, whether we work behind a desk or on a trade site. But do we still need unions? That's a question that's being asked a lot lately, as parts of the country are plunged into chaos amid union fights for pay rises, and huge arms of prominent movements are accused of employing underworld criminals to carry out standover tactics to get their way, a lot of the time to the detriment of regular working Australians. Someone who wouldn't agree with that assessment is Wilhelmina Stracke. She's a pro-union content creator and the Assistant Secretary of the Victorian Trades Hall Council. Will, is it fair to say some unions are holding everyday Aussies hostage?
I don't think that's fair, but I mean, you'd expect me to say that given I work in the trade union movement. But I don't think that's right. I'm assuming that what you're talking about, for instance, is strike action. So the first thing is strike action is generally a last resort. In order to get to strike action, you have to have been trying to negotiate things like agreements and wages and conditions for a very long time. And you have to demonstrate to the commission that you've had a red hot crack at trying to fix it at the workplace. So in terms of that, strike action is really the very last step that results from an unsuccessful negotiation. And so people don't do it lightly. You don't get paid by your employer when you're taking strike action. So I understand that people can get frustrated, but those workers are incredibly frustrated as well. That's why they've gone to that very last step. And they honestly believe it's the only way that they're going to be able to get the outcome that they think is fair.
I want to start by talking about what's been going on specifically in Sydney and New South Wales in recent months and weeks. There were days of horrific delays on the trains last week, which threw the entire network into chaos, also disrupting the lives of thousands of ordinary people. Today, the first of 200 New South Wales health psychiatrists are resigning over pay, which is set to cripple what's already a severely strained system. Now, these workers have been striking over pay negotiations and pay deals, asking anywhere from between a 25% to 32% pay increase. How is it fair for the unions to be impacting the public specifically in such a way, considering both sets of workers, you could say, are already very well paid?
Well, with people in the health sector, I would say they are so committed to the work that they do. So nurses, doctors, psychiatrists, healthcare workers, disability workers, all of these workers no one goes into that kind of work because they think they want to earn a shit ton of money, right? You're actually really committed to kind of doing that work. So for workers to say, we're actually going to resign from doing the work that we love because we don't think that we're being respected, we don't think that the claims that we have are being taken seriously, is actually a massive step. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is the way our system works basically is employers are going to pay the least they have to pay to get the work done. That's the nature of our system, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to pay those workers the very least you can get, effectively that you have to get the workers that you need. No factor in that calculation is whether or not that's enough for that worker to live a good life, whether they can pay the bills, keep a roof over their head, put food on the table, and take the family, maybe down to a local beachside resort to sit in a caravan for a few weeks and have a holiday. That's not part of the calculation from their perspective. And so if it's just a matter of, you should just take whatever you're offered, that's okay. And if you don't like it, move. If we're all moving around all the time trying to find a boss that's going to pay a little bit more, in the end, we all end up on the minimum, because why are bosses going to pay more if they don't need to? So if you think that that's the basic framework of the system, workers coming together to negotiate collectively is part of what pushes back against that. Workers who then say, actually, we're generating part of the profit of this organisation, and so we should have a share of that profit. Right? Everyone agrees profit is necessary, but workers are saying we want a share of that. So sometimes that means workers coming together collectively and pushing back against the employer. Now, sometimes that's going to be in industries where that employer provides services that's going to impact people in the public. Our system says that if that impact is really significant, then Fair Work will step in and stop the industrial action if it's going to be too massive. But if we're saying to those workers in those services that have contact with the community, you can never take strike action because what you do might impact somebody, then we're effectively relegating those workers to earn the minimum that they can earn that their boss will be prepared to pay them. That's what we're relegating them to. The other thing is, when one group of workers does better, that pushes us all up, right? So other people benefit from that. So there can be disruption, but it can actually mean that everybody overall benefits.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone's disagreeing with the rights of unions to negotiate for better pay for their members. But I think the issue for everyday Australians who aren't part of a union is that their lives are being disrupted significantly by this action. So, for example, we've seen Opal card readers turned off in the past where the union is, and I've seen it on buses and on trains, the union says, we're not happy with what's happening. We're going to turn off Opal readers in New South Wales, which means you get free public transport. It's the state government that's going to suffer, not you. Why can't we see more action like that where it's not directly impacting the public in such a massive way? Because then I think you wouldn't lose the will of the people, and that's what is at risk here.
Sometimes you do those actions and they don't have the impact. Like if things don't change, you have to find ways to escalate. If we're saying you can never cause disruption, then why would employers ever come to the table with a better offer? Because effectively they're going to say, you know what? You can only go so far. And at that point, really, there's not a lot you can do. And so we're not going to come to the table with a better offer because there's really no pressure on us. I suppose the other question I'd ask is, why are the employers not coming to the table with a better offer?
Part of this conversation and the idea that unions could lose the goodwill of the people, we can't ignore the CFMEU and what's been happening with that union recently. The construction arm of the CFMEU has been accused of allowing criminals and bikies to infiltrate its movement, use standover tactics and illegal means to achieve its outcomes, which once again centre around the benefits of members specifically. Now, the federal government stepped in and forced the construction arm into administration. It sparked protests in Sydney and in Melbourne. Can you see why there's distrust of the modern trade union movement when stories like this come out?
There are people in every single industry and sector across, like you think about banking and finance and all of those things. There are people who don't behave in line with the values of what you'd hope that they would, right? The average trade unionist today is a woman aged probably in her 40s who works in the caring sector. She's a disability worker, or she might work in admin. So she's a disability worker, a retail worker, a nurse, a teacher. That's kind of what the average trade unionist is today. The second thing I'd say is a union is a collection of workers. So I understand that people point to individual people within that and say, you're a bad person. But actually what a union is the collective of workers. So a group of workers who say, we reckon we can get better outcomes if we operate together. And that's what we are. That's what the union is. And then that union employs people, that collective of workers employs people along the way to help them to get to the outcomes that they want. And that's someone like me. I'm a trade union official, right? So I think within that system, these things are never foolproof. And it's clear the way the system is working. I mean, unions are some of the most audited, scrutinised organisations in Australia. And so it's actually not that common for things to go wrong, to be honest.
You've touched on it a little bit yourself, but unions have achieved so much for workers since they've been around since the 1800s here in Australia. Annual leave, sick leave, safety in the workplace, collective bargaining, meal breaks, things like that, where, you know, the modern workplace, whether it's on a trade site or whether it's in an office, is thanks to the union movement. However, the negative press that unions are getting at the moment can't be avoided. Is there a concern that if that goodwill of the people is lost, that it'll force people to actually move away from trade unions to vote for anti-union parties in politics and to kind of say, well, we don't need them anymore. What are they actually achieving for me as a regular person who's not a member of a union?
Well, interestingly enough, the stats don't bear that out in terms of the practicality of what's happening. Unions are currently, we've had a period of decline, but actually we're on the rise again in terms of membership. Workplaces that are unionised are safer workplaces. There are lower rates of incidence of injuries and there are less catastrophic injuries. Workplaces that are unionised are workplaces where people are earning better pay on average. So the trajectory and the history tells us that unions will have a place as long as we have a system where effectively you are going to get better outcomes if you work together.
So what is there left to fight for then? So unions, by your last answer, I suppose, still hold businesses and employers and the state governments across the country to account. What else can they do? What else can they achieve?
How long is a piece of string? What I'd say is, well, for instance, right now we are campaigning for reproductive health leave. So we know that menopause, menstruation, vasectomy, hysterectomy, these are things that happen to lots of people. Our workplaces historically haven't been enormously flexible or accommodating of the challenges faced by workers. There is a bit of a tendency, in fact, small business is more likely to do this better, right? Where they actually see their workers as individuals who might have individual issues. Big organisations have come to see workers largely as units inside their business and they don't operate with a degree of flexibility and support. For instance, 1 in 3 women are likely to experience miscarriage. Lots of workplaces say that those women should take sick leave for that. Now, is that woman sick? No, she is not. She's experiencing what can be an incredibly traumatic and difficult thing that's happened, and she then uses up the personal leave, the 10 days of personal leave for that. And then later in the year, when she gets a cold or she gets the flu or whatever it is, she doesn't have any sick leave remaining because she's had this thing happen in her life that is very common that workplaces do not accommodate for. Or IVF, 1 in 18 babies today is born with assisted reproductive technology, and there is time required to do that. That is a time-intensive thing. I think we would all say that I would like to see a future with lots of little kids around, and I quite like the idea of people who can't themselves, for instance, necessarily have kids, being afforded that opportunity. But if in doing that, they are using up all of their personal leave, then it becomes a very difficult thing for them then to deal with let's say that they do that and then they do get sick and then suddenly they're dealing with the fact that they can't take time off and then they present to work and they're sick and gee whiz, everybody else gets sick. Because actually in this country, we have more of a problem with presenteeism, with people showing up to work who are unwell, than we do with absenteeism, with people who are just going, you know what, I'm going to go and have a day of surfing. Actually, we don't really have a culture of that. And a recent report's found, for example, it is 30 times more expensive not to provide reproductive health leave to the economy than it is to provide it. So these are things that, as an individual, it can be very difficult to negotiate, but collectively, working together, union members, so workers say, actually, we think this is important. Actually, we think it's important enough that we're going to go and campaign for it. Actually, we think it's important enough that we as a group are going to talk to politicians about why it's important, and that's what we do.
Will Stracke, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We do appreciate your insights and your opinions. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That was Wilhelmina Stracke, the Assistant Secretary of the Victorian Trades Hall Council, speaking with me there. And if you want to check out her content on socials, you can find her on TikTok, Insta and X at Will Stracke. That's WILSTRACKE. And that is it for this episode of The Briefing. Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it. And if you want, check out our socials too and maybe share one of our posts to your friends. We're on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. We're also on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. We'll see you next time.